India's digital economy is accelerating, but the real story is underneath the apps, compute, power, cooling, connectivity, and operational discipline that keeps always on. Always on. India is growing. Running data centers are no longer a backup infrastructure, they are the new industrial backbone for cloud, AI payments, e governance, streaming, and enterprise modernization. AI workloads rise and data sovereignty expectations tighten. The conversation shifts from build more capacity to build trust worth capacity, secure, resilient, compliant, energy aware, economically, and sustainable. Today, we are joined by Sunil David, bringing a deep technology leadership into IoT, intelligent communication lens to unpack what leaders must get right before India scales to the next wave of digital infrastructure. Before we dive into the topic, let's look at a small video on Power of Knowing Forum. Welcome to Power of Knowing Forum's weekly podcast series. And let's welcome our speaker, Mr. Sunil David, and start the discussion. Sir, good evening. Welcome to our podcast, sir. How are you today, sir?
Yeah, good evening, Prem. I'm doing well. Thank you. I hope you're doing well, Prem.
Yes, sir. Great, sir. Sir, thank you for being most, I will say, the leader, speaker or the leader who's come back to the podcast many a times. This is the fourth time I
Yeah,
think you are part of the podcast. Thank you for making it happen, and it means a lot for us to be you being part of our podcast series, sir. Thank you for joining us.
no, it's absolute pleasure, Prem. Always enjoyed engaging in a conversation with you in the past as well. So, looking forward to this interaction, Prem.
Thank you, sir. Sir, let's begin with what makes modern data center a true economic engine, not just building full of servers.
Yeah, so the very apt question, Prem. So, let me start by saying that today data centers are not just real estate with servers, right?
Okay.
They are an enabler of India's digital economy. So, if you just look at it today, Prem, every UPI transaction, every e-commerce interaction that you have, every AI model that is running, every 5G service, every access to a government digital platform for e-governance, every OTT stream, and every cloud workload. Today, they are all dependent on what? Compute,
Yeah.
storage, connectivity, power, cooling, and security. And where does that all sit? They all sit in a data center, right? So, in my view, data center is something which is not just a data, which is a center, but which converts data into digital services, intelligence, because we want to draw insights from the intelligence. Third is trust, we talked about it. And more importantly, Prem, it is about economic value, right? Because whatever data that is hosted in a data center, you want insights from it, you want intelligence from it, and it has to create economic value for individuals, enterprises, as well as for the government, right? And talking about engine for India's digital economy, very briefly, I'll tell you across three layers we are going to see how it's going to be a true engine. One is from the consumer side, Prem, right? Because if you just look at it, whether it is UPI, whether it is smartphones, or video streaming. You talked about e-commerce and all that. That is going to obviously increase the amount of data that is going to be sent. Second is enterprise side, and there a lot of activity happening. And you all know that AI adoption is big, especially AI workloads. They need GPUs, right? So that is another big trigger point. And third is the e-governance service from government, right? I mean, the whole digital public infrastructure. Whether you look at Aadhaar, whether you look at any other platform, whether it is UPI, whether you look at all that depends on data centers, right? And of course, you talked about sovereignty. It's very important that you store data within boundaries of India and all that. But across these layers, consumer side, enterprise, and government, that is really going to be the engine which will drive India's digital economy going forward, Prem.
Sir, very true, because every transaction touches the data center, and every
Yeah.
transaction is recorded somewhere in a data center, which is the backbone for the economy, is what I am getting to here. Now, what is the real engine function of a data center in India's digital economy today, sir?
I want to give you some examples. Okay, if you just look at India, the country, we have the banking financial services. I'll take examples of manufacturing, banking, financial services. I'll take retail, and let's start with banking, right? And
Okay.
today,
Yeah.
most of the banks, you cannot afford failed transactions, right? You want low latency networks because as you interact with any app or a banking website, the transaction has to be very quick, right? So obviously latency networking becomes very critical, right? So purely from a BFSI standpoint, and also we've seen the growth of the fintech ecosystem, right? So whether it is the large banks, private banks, public sector banks, fintechs who are offering services to customers, a lot of dependency on data centers today. Quite a few of them have hosted their applications on the cloud. Some of them have on-prem. Secondly, retail. I mean, and again, marketplaces like Amazon, Flipkart are good examples where today you're transacting with them real time, right? And again, questions about reliability of the applications, connectivity becomes critical. You want your transactions to be fulfilled real time, all that. Telecom networks, Prem, and having spent so many years in the telecom industry, I can't but share some examples on telecom because today telecom networks are very software defined, right? I mean, if you look at in the past, you had very expensive hardware that was residing in a point presence or a pop, and today it was definitely hardware, multi-purpose hardware, commodity
Yeah.
hardware, and for that, of course, you're going to
Right. Right.
on data networks to be able to do that orchestration and control. Look at 5G today, right? It is a lot of the control and all that is happening on the cloud, and through which you're able to control the 5G radios and so on and so forth, and everything related to telecom, whether it is the billing, whether it is CRM systems, they're all cloud hosted. And telecom of any digital economy, right? If your telecom networks today are able to function and provide you good, reliable, low latency networks, high speed networks, you'll have to obviously thank the data centers and the cloud providers who are able to make that happen. And then, of course, on the retail and e-commerce, I give you the examples. Government, of course, Prem, I gave you the examples. Just look at today, Aadhaar, whether you look at any other digital public infrastructure platform, right? Uh, the kind of scale that it has to offer. I mean, just look at Aadhaar, 1.3 billion people today providing digital identity, right? To be able to support such scale, you cannot deploy something on-prem, right? I mean, you have to look at elastic. It has to be built for universality. It has to be built for scale, and that can only happen when you could have good, reliable, secure, sustainable data centers, Prem.
Sir, you're talking about telecom, sir, because
Mhm.
I was part of few of the telecom implementations.
Mhm.
When we were thinking, I don't want to name the customer, but there
Mhm.
were customers who in the telecom sector used to think, now my processing is in only India, right?
Mhm.
So how can I use this infrastructure to give services to other countries where my Indian time, where people are not using my telecom, I can give some of the services. Those were the thought process where, well, the physical or cloud service providers are started giving telecom services, because they wanted to see how they can scale up across, be available 24 hours, see how telecom was able to bring that kind of an infrastructure to support applications round the clock. So that's the point that I think you are bringing up, and they have become very robust. And one more point is, we saw the real power of telecom and networks in the COVID period, where
Yep.
everybody was sitting at home, and the network was able to take all the bandwidth and still able to cater to all the businesses that were running remotely 100%, right? So we did lot of business 100% on remote only. That's the power of the telecom sector, that it grew in that period, is what I understand. What sectors are most dependent now, sir? BFSI, telecom, retail, government, manufacturing, and why?
Absolutely. In fact, and manufacturing, I want to touch upon that because that's the big next growth area. Because what we're clearly seeing,
Okay.
and I interact a lot with manufacturers, Prem, because of my association, CII, I'm part of a couple of task force. We're trying to see what we can do for small and medium-sized manufacturers. Earlier,
Okay.
manufacturers were not too open to move workloads onto cloud. They're very
Hmm.
particular that data has to be
Yeah.
on-prem, right?
Yes.
Edgeless cloud, Poly cloud. But of late, we are seeing many manufacturers are willing to trust the cloud to have some of their workload moved there. The manufacturing today
Hmm.
from cloud data center, for example, one good example is IoT. You're
Hmm.
getting so much data from shop floor. You're constantly pumping data performance, supply chain data. Lot of the data now being processed within the cloud. And today you would have probably heard of the term called digital twin, right? I mean, you can build a twin today of a product or a process or a system.
Yeah. Hmm.
And when you want to build a digital way, predictive maintenance, they're all and that so we can clearly see that today we are moving from machine driven to data driven kind of a scenario frame. So manufacturing, yes, a huge growth area, and we'll see a lot more manufacturers today uh, move to cloud and move their applications workloads to cloud very soon.
Sir, I think very important is, as you rightly said, the IoT space and the market
Hmm.
manufacturing space is going to be the next boom, is what we see, because every uh, every device in the IoT space will communicate to the data centers. Every telecoms provider needs to be looking at their devices communicating to the data centers. Data becomes prime focus on what is the availability these manufacturing industries bring in when you look at these kind of devices. What breaks first when data center maturity is low? Latency, reliability, security, or costs?
Again, a very important question, Prem. So, in my view, I think usually reliability breaks first. Okay, then others like latency, security, and cost would follow because when and the first visible symptom of Prem when reliability fails is that you experience downtime and the performance is degraded, right?
Okay.
So, for example, latency issues that cause uh, takes long time for transactions to complete, right? Because the network is not functioning for whatever reason. Then you have security, which becomes a big issue, right? Because you have weak access control, poor monitoring, and then the segmentation is also not very adequate, and poor patch management. So that becomes an issue, and cost also frame because that becomes like a silent killer because your cooling is inefficient, your over provisioning, then your workload management is not very poor, is very poor, and then there are emergency fixes that increases the operating cost, right? So it's actually following like this. Your reliability drops, latency increases, security risk increases, and the cost escalates, right? So cost is actually not saved, it is actually postponed because it later comes back as higher downtime, cyber risk, then poor performance, and also inefficient energy management frame. So basically it is that sequence that just gets followed.
I think very important point, because what you say is, first is, you will have to have a strong data center presence, trust built for customers to come and stay with you, and that's very important. Now what we're saying is, from DC's digital power plants for compute, that's the next point is, plus you build the trust, right? They become that kind of a frame for us. You just spoke about UPI, right? Their transactions are getting higher. It will not it is not going to reduce. The more adoption is getting added every day. The new transactions are coming up, and India has been the hub for digital transactions, which is top in the world, is what I understand. Your point on it, sir. Am I right in saying that, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Prem.
So what we are also looking at, some of the citizen services which are getting streamlined. Again, that is also coming. Now, also you spoke about OTT platforms where a
Hmm.
lot of content is consumed, and
Yep.
everywhere you see AI also coming into place, where
And the
how this.
content is also high definition content, Prem. I mean,
Yes.
high definition content needs high bandwidth, low
Yes.
latency, right? To give you that
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, yeah. So I think data centers aren't infrastructure anymore. They are the economic infrastructure, is what you are saying in as many words. Now, what are the top three design choices that decide success or failure, sir?
Okay, so I want to list out three. Okay, so one is the location where you're going to have the data center. And if you just look at India, Prem, if you just look at India as a country, very ironical, Prem, that India generates 20% of the overall data globally,
Okay. Okay.
but India's data center capacity is just less than 5%.
Okay.
Maximum data centers are in the US, 5,400 plus data centers in the US. Then Europe has a number of data centers. And then India's got about anywhere from 150 to 250 sort operational data centers in India. But again, within India, Prem, there are only 7 or 8 cities where most of the data centers are clustered.
Right.
Mumbai,
Yeah.
Chennai alone is about 65 to 70% of data centers are in Mumbai and Chennai. And I'll come to that later why. And then other cities like Bangalore, Delhi, Hyderabad all follow. But first is location, that is very critical. You need to figure out one is two very important aspects. One is power availability, because for data centers to run, you need continuous power,
Right.
uninterrupted power. And second is you're needing huge amount of water, because all the
Cooling.
infrastructure that is there in the data, and you know it, Prem, so much of heat gets dissipated. I need a lot of cooling, right? So you can do air cooling, you can do liquid cooling, immersion cooling, and so on and so forth, right? So power availability and availability of water from a location standpoint becomes very, very important, right? Then third important thing is fiber routes. And again,
Hmm.
Mumbai and Chennai are very essential here, because if you just look at the submarine cable systems, 16 to 17 cable systems come to Mumbai, about 8 to 10 cable systems come to Chennai.
Hmm.
So Mumbai and Chennai are connected to the rest of the world through submarine cable systems, right? A lot of the data is going through these undersea fiber cable systems. Then there are, of course, places like Cochin, Trivandrum, and all that stuff, right? The other important aspect is disaster risk. That
Hmm.
location where you're going to have the data center, is it earthquake prone,
Yeah.
right? Is it subject to very frequent floods and all that? So that is another factor. So one is location. You have to identify, you look at all these factors. Second thing is resilience architecture. You'll have to build the redundancy in terms of power. For example, if it's Chennai, we don't have any private provider here. In some cities like Mumbai, Delhi, you have private providers. So can
Right.
we get redundancy in terms of power? Can I get it from the government uh, provided power provider, as well as can I look at a private producer of power? Then redundancy in terms of network, redundancy in terms of cooling, storage, and so on. And third, very important aspect, Prem, is sustainability and the energy design, right? So I talked about power and cooling, but with AI workloads, you're requiring very high rack density. The power density per rack is also going up, right? So today you're talking about sustainable data centers, green data centers, and all that. So that also becomes a very important aspect. The location that we are going to, how much of renewable energy that we can get in terms of wind, solar, and all that, right? So just to sum up, the winners will be decided by not just by who builds fastest, but who chooses the right location, designs for the failure, and manages energy efficiently. Those will be the important factors, Prem.
Sir, I will recall one of the data centers when the BFSI or the RBI mandated that everybody should have a three-way DR setup, right? So I think I was fortunate enough to do it for a bank where the primary data center was in VSNL Chennai.
Mhm.
The nearline data center was in SIFI, Chennai,
Mhm.
and the DR was in Hyderabad. So,
Okay.
so we had a connectivity between primary data center and the nearline data center,
Mhm.
where the transaction was first committed in the nearline data center, and
Mhm.
the primary data center was updated next.
Mhm.
So while we designed that architecture, the commit latency, we did not have the load more on the primary data center because the commit used to happen at the nearline data center. From the
Okay.
nearline data center, the synchronization to the DR used to happen from nearline center because the load was not there on the DR systems. The commit
Mhm.
used to be there only on the DR. So when we looked at this one, RBI gave us a appreciation saying that was the first three-way DR implementation that we did. This is way back 15 years now. So that gave us a understanding how data can be pumped, how critical the infrastructure is, how they shifted the data centers. And I was fortunate enough even to look at the Rital's fluid data center model,
Mhm.
where a container was there. You only had four sources of connectivity that were there. Everything was intelligent cabling and all those things, where you had two fiber cables connected for redundancy, two power sockets, and we can move that data center to any. We've done about, I was fortunate about to do four such implementations in Bangalore. And
Okay.
I think that's the kind of data centers that we today. The data centers, as you rightly said, we have very limited, and Hyderabad is picking up is what I see in the data center
Yeah.
market. uh, Again, the location constraint, if you look at fiber connectivity, undersea cabling is only Mumbai and Chennai. So I think that's where we stand, sir. Now you
Yeah,
are
just
talking
want
about
to add, just to add to one point, Prem,
yes,
from a
sir.
location standpoint, it also depends on what kind of policies that the state has specifically for data centers.
Data
And
centers,
I think you're aware that about 4 or 5 years back, different states came out with their own data center policy. Like Telangana
right?
had one, Tamil Nadu had
Yeah,
one, Karnataka had one, and they tried to incentivize people to build data centers in their respective states by
right.
offering some tax ops,
Yeah.
stamp duty exemption, and then input tax credit on GST for especially if you're buying HVAC equipment and all this stuff, right? So state, it's nice to see also frame that states are competing against each other to offer the best for the investor to invest in that state, right? And that's where we are seeing a lot of interesting policies from state governments trying to woo the people to invest in their specific states, Prem.
When I was part of Wipro, I will be proud to say that when I was part of Wipro, we were part of building the state data centers also.
Oh,
For
wonderful.
so I was fortunate enough to work on five state data centers, where I had it for TNDC, I had it for AP, this one Karnataka, Nagaland, and I think it was Sikkim somewhere. So five data centers. I was able to run these projects, and we build data centers for the state data center model. So I think it's a different ball game today what we see, sir. Now
Yeah.
looking at that tiring and resilience, now I
Mhm.
want to talk on that. What is the
Mhm.
minimum bar leaders should demand for uptime and recovery? Because you said, right, connectivity,
Yeah.
power, routes, disaster recovery. What could be those, sir, as an ask from the leadership?
Right. So, we've been talking about tier one, tier two, tier three, tier four data centers, right? So I think
Right.
what is important is not the marketing label, whether it is tier three or tier four and all that. What matters, Prem, is what kind of resilient architecture that has been built, right? Especially we're talking about business critical workloads, right? And hence, for any leader, I think some very important aspects that has to be considered, right? So one is the redundant power paths. That is one very crucial element because, as I mentioned earlier, power, you need uninterrupted power. Second thing is you need redundant cooling. Then third is very important, and we'll talk about telecom later, but multiple telecom carriers. For example, if you have two providers providing connectivity into the data center, then very important that they come through two different routes into your data center, so that in case there's a fiber cut in one route, the other one will continue to operate. Then one more very important dimension is very clear RTO, which is recovery time objective. How quickly can the system be restored? And also, second important thing is strong recovery point objective. How much data loss is acceptable? I think those have to be very clear. And then other important thing, Prem, I'm sure you're aware the security certifications, right? I think today you have ISO 27001.
Yeah.
And so you got to follow these certifications, right? I mean, that's also very important. And then you have to do regular audits of your data center. That's very critical. Then how do you manage incidents? Incident report transparency. There should be absolute transparency when you're reporting incidents, right? It cannot be brushed under the carpet. And you have to get real evidence of the actual performance of the data center, right? So all these are very important aspects to be considered when you're looking at uptime and recovery frame.
Very true, sir. Sir, coming to the what we are talking about decisions into leadership language where availability, targets, redundancy, as you rightly said, RTO, RPO,
Yeah.
and the other point also will come is the capex model versus the opex model. So where do we
Mm.
trade off, right? Because
Mm.
data center is one space where you have constant investment needed, systems
Mm.
getting upgraded, you need new technology. Now GPUs coming into the market, you need to scale up them, and
Yep.
power. These are all on demand things where business needs, right? Speed without architecture becomes an expensive failure is what we are talking about. Coming to the point where we are talking about power, cooling, and all these things,
Mhm.
how should
Mhm.
leaders think about it, sir, when we look at power and cooling? What is the pointers that they should look at as a
Yeah, I
leader?
think, yeah, that's a very important point, Prem, because if you just look at, if you look at every, most racks in the past, they were only handling the CPU workloads, right?
Right.
And as you know, CPUs process data in sequence. And today, when
Mm,
you're talking about GPU workloads, they are doing parallel processing, right? So the amount of
right.
compute storage that you're needing is much more. And today also, Prem, the power density per rack has also increased. In the past, you're
Increase.
talking about 12 to 15 kilowatts per rack. Today,
Right.
you're talking about 50 kilowatts per rack, and they're talking about even getting to 100 kilowatts per rack, right?
Mm,
So you might even get to 1 megawatt per rack. So that
okay.
is something which might happen 4 or 5 years from now. So very clearly that data centers are consuming a lot of energy, and AI is obviously increasing the amount of spend.
Yeah.
So that has to be. So you'll have to look at how you manage your power and water, right? So I was just reading a statistic, Prem, when I was doing my research. Today, if you want to run a 100 megawatt hyperscale data center, if you want to run that, can you can you just guess how much of water is needed for cooling? Any guess, Prem?
Sir, I was reading for one data center in Arizona or somewhere. They built one data center. I think
Uh,
Meta is building a data center. They wiped out the water resources. About 30,000 gallons of water is what they evaporized, is what I understand, sir. I am not having a clear picture, but this is
yeah.
what I think is
So
amazing.
you'll be
Basic.
surprised. There's one body called CEW,
Okay.
CEEW. So they
Okay.
were evaluating, they were doing a research in terms of how much of power, sorry, how much of water will be consumed for cooling,
Cooling.
right? Because today you can have, of course, you have air conditioners which will give you air cooling, and then you can have liquid cooling or immersion cooling.
Hmm.
But apparently, for running a 100 megawatt hyperscale data center, you need 2 million liters of water per day.
Wow.
2 million
Imagine.
liters of water per day. This is a report from CEW. Maybe you can check it out later. But
Hmm.
three fundamental questions when you look at power and cooling, right? So one is the data center strategy power secure? Is
Hmm.
the cooling efficient?
Okay.
And is it sustainable and future ready? And Prem, I just wanted to highlight on cooling because I'm just sharing from my own experience. Today, if you look at cooling, no, Prem, um, so much of heat is getting dissipated from the infrastructure and data centers, right? And
Right.
most of the air conditioners are there. They set it at a particular temperature,
Right.
okay, 18 or 20 degrees centigrade.
20.
But
Yeah.
there are different racks generate power dissipation. The heat dissipation varies from rack to rack depending
Right.
on how much load you're putting on the server, and you know it very well.
Yeah.
So I'm actually engaged with one startup which is based out of T Hub in Hyderabad.
Hmm.
we are actually part of a program called Global Spring Growth Program, where India and UK are trying to partner with each other.
Mm.
And there's
Mm.
one startup that I'm mentoring. It's
Okay.
called Vapor Tech. Okay,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I just wanted to highlight from a cooling standpoint what they're doing. Okay, they're actually combining physics and AI. Very
Okay.
interesting. So what they're doing is, in a data center today, you have the chillers and the air conditioning units, right? So what they do is they do a detailed study of the heat flows. So they're using
Mm.
they're using CFD,
Mm.
computational fluid dynamics, which is
Okay.
physics, and they're also measuring where are the heat spots, where are the cool zones, hot zones, and they're doing correlation between how much of cooling is there. They also correlate it based on weather information.
Mm.
Basis that, they can actually tell you how much of energy has to be consumed to be able to
Okay.
do the cooling, and thereby they can optimize cooling, because even to do cooling you need energy, right?
Mm.
So it's interesting that there are startups who have also seen this as an opportunity, that with so many data centers coming, the cooling requirements going up, there are different ways by which you can use data and you can combine that with physics and solve this problem, Prem.
Sir, I did a discussion in Chennai. I forgot the organization's name. They were a manufacturing organization, sir,
Mhm.
and their complete facility was green energy facility.
Mhm.
They had shown us some of the documents where they said whatever water is coming from the ACs, which is getting heated, the water for uses, they used it to circulate it to the plants, that gets filtered again, and they had some mechanism to bring back that water back to the ACs again. So
And that's a
that
great
was,
example of circularity,
yeah,
recycling of water, right?
yes. So that was an interesting concept. They said our facility is 70 to 80% eco energy. I
Amazing.
was looking at that, that was very, very nice to look at. So now, if you take that also, what would be the hidden cost of cheap power when reliability and sustainability are ignored?
So cheap power can really become expensive if it is not reliable, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
cheap power doesn't mean reliable power, frame, right?
right.
It can be unreliable, it can be carbon intensive, or if it is
Mm,
not scalable also, frame, because today you might have power, 2 years, 3 years later, um, can you have higher amount of power? We don't know, right?
I don't
So
know.
the hidden cost can be downtime cost, right? Because if the grid reliability is poor, then you need you need to use the backup systems more often. And Prem, that many times they use diesel generators as backup, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So if your downtime is there, if your grid power is not reliable, then cost of diesel goes up, right? And maintenance of that becomes important. Second thing is the cooling inefficiency, right? A lot more energy is used to remove the heat. That's another factor. Third is carbon and ESG risk, frame, because if you're generating a lot more carbon emissions, then it affects your ESG reporting. That's another factor. And then also, your regulatory and reputational risk, right? Because if you're generating more carbon and your ESG reports are not in compliance, then it impacts your reputation as well, right? So these are generally the hidden cost of cheap power, frame, in my view.
Okay. Sir, now how do we practically measure? Because we are talking about energy, right? Can we, or how do we measure, or can we measure, uh, practically measure reducing the energy risk, efficiency metrics, smarter cooling, or workload placements? Can we measure these things?
So I'll start by, you would have heard of the term called PUE,
Yeah,
power usage effectiveness, right?
yeah,
It is
yeah.
it's a simple formula, frame. Total power that is consumed by the data center divided by the power consumed by the IT equipment.
Okay,
Okay, so because if the power comes to data center, the power can be distributed, right? The
right,
IT equipment, storage, computers, all that, the servers use it. Then you're using that same power for cooling. Using the same power for lighting and air conditioning and all that, right?
right,
So there is this term called PUE, power usage effectiveness, right? So that's an important metric to track, where total power divided by the total power consumed by the IT or the server equipment or the infrastructure equipment. That always has to be one. If it is one, it means that the entire power is consumed by the infrastructure.
Hmm.
Okay, but today if you look at it, most data centers are at 1.5, 1.6. So they are working on trying to see what they can do to. So this is one very important metric, PUE.
PU.
Second thing is smarter cooling, right? So I gave you that example of this startup which is called Vapor Tech, which is trying to do something on the cooling side, right? So I won't elaborate on that cooling side, but you need more smarter cooling, and there are different types of cooling frames. So you have typically you have the air cooling, right? So you have your HVAC systems, the chillers which are separating the heat from the liquid, and all that cooled air is going through AHUs, air handling units, through ducts and all that. So typically cooling is through air, but today you have liquid cooling. You can actually, and then you have immersion cooling. In immersion cooling, the entire server is in a dielectric liquid, which is non-conductive, and then you
Yeah.
can also have liquid cooling. And in that context, that term that you must have heard of, direct-to-chip cooling. That is, you can only cool specifically the chips which are part of the
Hmm.
server infrastructure, right? So that is one.
Right.
Third, very important thing is the workload placement frame. So not every workload needs to be in the most expensive high resilience environment, right? So some workloads you can run on the cloud, some can be in co-location, some can be on-prem, some can be at the edge. For example, AI training for example, can be placed where power is available and cheaper. If you look at AI inference, that can be closer to the users, right? So that's another factor. Fourth important thing is renewable energy, and no data center. See, there was a study that was done in terms of how India data centers are green. In the last 5 years, the number of green data centers have doubled, Prem. So it was about some 50 to became 100 megawatts or something like that in the span of 5 years. So there is a conscious attempt by data centers to use a lot more renewable, and nobody can straight away go to renewable like 100% using solar
Yeah.
and wind, right? The transition, you have to use a mix of power from the grid, some from solar and wind, right? So how do you make sure that you are able to get the renewable, and availability of renewable also becomes important, right? Certain places you may not get solar power and all that. And then finally, you have to design for modularity, Prem. You cannot, you have to build everything in phases, right? So your capacity, power, cooling, they have to be added as the demand grows, right? You can't oversize data centers, right? So those are important factors to be considered, Prem.
Sir, I think what you are saying is today energy is an operational risk rather than
Yes,
just right. Plus, if you are not able to give that availability services and keep the customers available to their customers, it also becomes a brand risk, right? And that also can become a costly risk for us. And this
yes.
is, I think, what we should look at is efficiency, discipline, and continuous optimization where you need. Now, how do we optimize most of the infrastructure? You need to look at energy and its consumption also on the optimization side is what I think. Cloud bill is increasing as the energy bill also is increasing, right? So that's the point that we would like to highlight. And now coming to the next place, AI workloads are changing the data center game, right? So what is the difference now, sir? Or what is different now?
I think the clear difference is we are moving from CPU workloads to GPU workloads, right? I think, and with Gen AI and so many enterprises now wanting to adopt AI, and specifically if you just look at Gen AI, and especially when you're talking about using these large language models, which require very high computing infrastructure, storage infrastructure, and all that. So clearly, we are seeing that shift which is happening from CPU driven to GPU heavy, and the need to train all these large data sets. We need huge computing and storage and all that. That's one. Second thing is we need higher speed interconnects, frame, to connect the GPU clusters. You need high bandwidth connections, right? It has to be low latency, a lot more memory that is needed, massive storage that is required, significant cooling. All these are important factors. And what is very promising, Prem, is that the initiative taken by the government, right? I think you're aware of this India mission where they had this tender that was released to, and they have actually onboarded about 38,000 odd GPUs, right, as of
Hmm.
few months back, through 14 odd service providers, where they're
Right.
trying to offer GPU as a service,
Hmm.
right? Somebody doesn't, how many can afford to buy GPUs, right? Small
Yeah.
companies, startups cannot buy GPUs, right, Prem?
Right.
So to make it very cost effective for the startups, for small enterprises to access GPUs, government came up with this initiative to onboard 38,000 GPUs, and many big players have also, like Nvidia, Yota, and all that have. Like I think Nvidia, I met the CEO of Nvidia. Sorry, not Nvidia. Yota, Sunil
Mm.
Gupta. I met him a couple of years back at an event in Delhi. He told me that they spent $2 billion to buy Nvidia GPUs, and now they are offering it as a service, right?
Yeah.
And that was a big initiative from the government where they wanted these players to provide GPU as a service. And today you can get rates as less as 65 rupees per hour frame
Mm.
if you want to access a GPU,
Yeah.
which is very good, right? So we are clearly seeing the government is also pushing players to really offer very cost-effective access to all these kind of GPUs frames. So that's a very, very, very interesting and very important development frame.
I think government's initiatives also are bringing a lot of startups using these GPUs, and that
Yes.
was a costly affair when we used to go to the Amazons or the Azures where we wanted to buy GPUs as a service, right? Now, coming to that, how do AI training interference load reshape capacity planning and hardware strategies?
Yeah, so there are two parts, right? You have the training and you have the inference.
Sir?
Now,
Right.
if you look at if you're training, then you need obviously high GPU clusters, you need high speed networking, you need a lot more specialized storage and so on, right? So you need a lot more power, you need a lot more cooling, and you need scale also, Prem, right? Because you need this high GPU because you're training large data sets. So that's on the training side. Now you look at inference. In fact, they are predicting that there'll be a lot more capacity that will be generated for inference because that is very important. A nice analogy is somebody who's preparing for an exam is training, and when you're actually writing the exam, it is inference, right? So because like Chat GPT, no, you put in an input and it comes out with an output, right? That is inference. It is studying your input. Input is converted into tokens and you're getting an output which is nothing but inference. So inference has to be designed in such a way that the latency is low because you don't want to send something into Chat GPT and wait for 1 minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes for a response to come, right? So it has to be architected in such a way that your latency is very, very low, very, very high reliability, and also the cost optimization, right? The cost of building that should be much lower, right? So you got to move it closer to where the users are, right? So those are important factors. And when you're doing the capacity planning frame, I think there are two or three important aspects to consider. One is the rack density, which is going up. Second thing is the power per rack is actually going up, and cooling is also evolving from being air cooling to a lot more liquid ready and all that, right? So obviously the hardware strategy is also changing. So all enterprises have to look at it from GPU side, accelerators, high speed interconnects, and all that in terms of both the training side as well as the inference side. Prem.
Got it, sir. So, what mistakes happen when organizations treat AI as just another application?
Very important question, Prem. And Prem, you would agree to this that for AI to work, your data foundations have to be
Yeah,
very strong, right? Because this usual adage, right? Garbage in, garbage out, right? So
this
if
has
your
been
data is
done
not
for a very long time. I think we
sorry,
coined this word when the software started. I think it was 10, 15 years where garbage in and garbage out. Now, today we're talking in the context of AI also onto the same thing. Yes, sir. Please.
no, absolutely. So, for what is very important is the data readiness, right? I mean, you need good quality, clean data, right? And that's why that emphasis on trying to make sure that clean data is passed on to the model. So the output obviously will be a lot more reliable, right? So it has to be clean, it has to be governed, secure, and all that. So that is the data readiness. Your data foundations have to be strong, irrespective of what industry it is, Prem, manufacturing, banking, whatever it is, right? Second thing is they also underestimate the compute requirements, right? Because you can run an AI pilot on small servers, right, or small infrastructure. But when you're trying to run production AI at scale, then the compute requirements change, right? So underestimating the computing requirement, that's one. Then also underestimating latency needs, right? So again, it depends on use cases, Prem. So for example, if you're doing visual inspection of a factory, then you might probably want to run data on the edge and not have it on the cloud, right? Because you cannot tolerate high latency. Then they also underestimate security and governance. Again, very important, Prem, because these AI models are creating a lot more risks around data leakage, then the prompt injection, and so on. And finally, Prem, they also underestimate the overall cost because AI workloads, today you might start with small workloads, but as you scale the workloads, it can actually create cloud shocks. And you might have heard of this term called cloud shocks, right? They suddenly get a large bill for compute and storage, and then they wonder, how come my bill has gone up and all that, right? So they underestimate the cost also, right? So the infrastructure cost can actually go up if they are not governed properly. So broadly, these are the areas that I wanted to
Sir,
share.
I'll take one pointer because I was in such situation where we've been telling these are the
Mhm.
loads that you are using. Okay, this is the cost today. If you don't manage it today, you will go to the next cost bill, and as you rightly said, the shocks came up after 3 4 months. We were having a bill of $15,000 running about 70 plus production environments and few UAT setups, but our sizing was never thought about, and
Mhm.
suddenly after few days the compute power became more and we started to increase the capacity and the bill started shooting up,
Oh
but
my.
we did not know what time is required that hike should go, and you should auto provision and deprovision also should be planned, so we did not do that. A 15,000 bill became a 50,000 bill.
Oh my God.
And then we went in, we said which process is using, which Kubernetes cluster is using more compute, what are the processes that use more, how many instances are running. So we had to go in, how many cores are being used. And that was a deep dive which we were able to bring down to 25,000 from 50,000, from a 15,000 increase to 50,000. So that is one thing. And also you said because earlier production environments and UAT environments were there. People used to test on the UAT environments, and those environments were limited. I will take the banking because I am from the banking side, where we had an UAT environment only for 5 to 6 branches. Whereas when we bring it to production, we need to test. So what we used to do is on the UAT environment, we used to do a DR drill on a weekend, where we'll tell specific branches to come and connect to UAT environment, tell us the performance. That's how we used to analyze how the whole structure used to come in. So I just wanted to bring, because you said that costs are not looking at the same when you do it in POC and a
Yeah.
production environment. So the compute and everything gets increased. Now,
Yeah.
what we also looked at the supply chain, the
Uh,
governance, all these AI ready infrastructure as a phased journey. You cannot jump in and get everything, is what you are saying, right, sir? Sir, one what I
and
feel
also
is,
cloud
yeah.
shocks. Not surprisingly, I was just reading 2 days back. Cloud service providers, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Google Cloud, and others. First quarter of 2026, they had a 35% growth compared to last year, and the
Okay.
revenue that they generated is about $129 billion. So
Okay.
no wonder their probably revenues
More provisioning.
are.
Sir, I think AI does not just need data; it needs a discipline for the infrastructure to be maintained. Is what is. Sir, one final question before we get into the summarization of the 40 minutes that we have been. What are the new threats when data centers become critical national infrastructure?
I think one thing which is clear, Prem, is that today cyber attacks, when we talk about threats, the cyber attacks which are AI powered, right? AI is a double-edged sword, right? You can use AI for
Mhm.
defense,
Right.
predicting when a particular attack might happen and prevent, kind of preventing any impact to your environment. And the hackers are also using AI to
Yeah.
kind of generate attacks, right? So AI is today a double-edged sword in that sense. But threats can be multiple, uh, and it also get the fundamentals right. We all talk
Hmm.
about cyber security, attacks through DDoS attacks and all that, but also fundamentals about physical access. Whom are you allowing into your data center,
Allowing. Yeah.
right? So you don't want unauthorized access to racks, your data center. Then there are also supply chain attacks. You talked about supply chain, right? Third-party software which is installed, one can find a way by which you can through that inject malware. Then DDoS attacks are very common. Somebody would flood the network with traffic, and then how do you prevent that? And you can build a network-based firewall to prevent it. The other important thing is insider risks. A lot of the threats are also because of insiders, right? So how do you make sure that they are making sure that employees, contractors, are all that are giving privileged access, are getting privileged access. And then final thing is using zero trust architecture frame. You're familiar with this, right? You don't trust anything, you verify, right? So broadly, these are things that I want to talk about. It cannot just be looked at it from the realm of only network security, data security, and all that, but get your fundamental, even physical security also has to be looked at, frame. So that's what I would want to see on this.
Sir, I'll take another example here because it's the same data center. We've seen the uh, access at audit not being done in many other cases, sir. Uh, I've seen where person is elevated from one role to another role but still carries the access. Is it
Mm.
required or not? We are not auditing.
Mm.
There are so many service accounts that are there which are tied up to certain accounts. If the person leaves, the accounts are also getting deleted. So there are certain things there. The service accounts are tied to the people. Those were
Mm.
some of the issues that I faced when I looked at them. So what we used to do is every quarter we used to run a audit of access review,
Mm.
application review, service accounts review.
Mm.
So if I delete the service account, how is it going to affect? What are the new service accounts that are coming in? So these were some of the audits that we used to do as part what you are saying. Sir, with this, I want to summarize data centers are now an economical infrastructure. They power digital growth, trust, and national scale resilience, right? So the winning formula is trustworthy capacity, secure uptime, compliance, and operational discipline, not just megawatts. That's the point. AI changes everything from density, heat, supply chain, governance. Leaders need an AI ready infrastructure roadmap, is what we are saying. Cyber resilience must be engineered in layered security drills, measurable recovery readiness is what we are saying, and strategy is workload led. Choose the right build, co-locate cloud mix based on the outcomes, risks, and real ROI. So these are the pointers that I had taken from the pointers that we've been discussing so far, and these are the points. Any final pointers that you would like to add before we close up?
So I just want to mention that um, there is, I think India is on a growth path when it comes to data center. Uh, in the way it's going to progress over the next 4 or 5 years. Because as of last year, the total capacity was around 1.4 to 1.5 gigawatts, and
Hmm.
they're expecting that over the next 4 or 5 years, by 2030, we'll probably touch 4 gigawatts,
Okay.
right? So that is the capacity that we're talking about. And what is also good frame is that one is, of course, there's a lot of push from the government. Government came up with a data center kind of a framework a few years back. A draft data center policy was published last year. Each states have their own data center policy, so there's a lot of good competition among states to get it. But also the fact that so much of investment is going from the big players. I mean, just look at it,
Yeah.
Prem. Reliance Industries, announced last year that they're going to invest about 15-20 billion dollars in the space. Adani Connects, a well-known name, they are also significantly
Yeah.
investing in data centers. And then just a month back, Prem, Google announced they're setting up a big AI hub in Vizag,
Vizag.
right? Where it's going to be about again a $15 billion investment. And I was just reading, Prem, that just last year alone, almost 30 billion in 30 billion of investment has been committed into India. How much is going to come, we don't know. But cumulatively, on the last 6 7 years, a commitment has been made to invest about close to $95 billion. So a lot of big investment is going to come into data centers. And my final point, Prem, is that we don't want data center growth to be confined only to the major cities like
Yeah.
Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Gurgaon. It has to go to the tier 2, tier 3 cities,
That
right?
to the
We
cities.
need to go into the Mangalores, we need to go into Coimbatore, we need to go into the smaller towns. Of course, it depends on the demand and all that, but it has to be a lot more inclusive, and data centers has to go and penetrate across every town and city in India. Then the growth will be a lot more inclusive, and then we can really see the power of the digital economy kind of being all more inclusive, not just confined to the rich, but every strata of society. Prem.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'll add one pointer before I conclude. We have two point. This one which has come as messages. I'll bring them up first. Then I'll tell you
Mhm.
what exactly I had in mind too. So one pointer is one Mr. Mukesh Jain has said very interesting discussion needful knowledge. So that is one comment. The second thing that I get is GPU usage per hour versus number of tokens pricing is surprising. So that's the second point that we've got from the audience today. Sir, as you rightly said, I was reading somewhere, I think it was on Instagram or somewhere, where there was a breakup given on the investment done by each of the service provider, the data center service providers. As you rightly said, Reliance is on the top. Then you have Adani's. Then you have new
Google,
data centers, Airtel, then VSNL,
Controllers, Jota,
Control.
quite a
Yeah,
few players.
quite a few. So there
Control,
seems to
Capital
be a
Land,
significant number, but Reliance tops the chart somewhere around 17 or 18 billion dollars is what they are committing, and rest all is about 5-6 billion dollars is what they are committing, and I think that is going to raise is what we see. So with this, thank you for being here, sir. You made it very clear. India digital economy does not run on apps alone. It runs on resilience, secure, well operated data centers ecosystem. For every leader listening, the question is simple: are you building capacity? Are you building trustworthy capacity? That's the point that we want to look at. And with this, we would like to conclude our session for the day, and thank you audience for joining us, and thank you for being here again and supporting us, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
thank you, Prem. Thank you.